Well, this is going to be an interesting one because what? First new Crash game in 12 years? Aw, heck yeah. So without further ado, welcome to the first review of... Whoa! The year was 1996. The console wars had all but come to a close. Nintendo's Mario and Sega Sonic the Hedgehog were locked in a gaming duel, with Nintendo eventually coming out on top. But when all was mostly said and done, a third challenger rose from the smoke, the Sony PlayStation. And with it, a new kid appeal platforming game. Spyro the Willy Wonka, Crash Bandicoot. Created by current Uncharted and Last of Us developers Naughty Dog, Crash Bandicoot blew up the market, receiving insanely low reviews and doing well enough to not only get 2 sequels, but also a kart racer a la Mario Kart. Unfortunately, after that, Naughty Dog bailed on the series, since the series' publisher, Universal Interactive, only gave them the rights to develop these 4 games. But despite that, Universal, being the downright terrible company they were, still wanted to milk the orange marsupial dry, and thus placed the series in the hands of... Eurocom, who ended up developing Crash Bash, a Mario Party-esque game. But we're not here to talk about that. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that Crash is another important part of my childhood. I must love looking at those on my series. So like I've done with Transformers and Sonic, I'm going to be talking about the game that started it all for me. After the release of Crash Bash, Universal handed the rights to develop the series to the company Traveler's Tales. The goal for them was to create a free-roaming platformer, in a style that I can only assume is similar to Mario 64, with Mark Cerny, the lead director of Crash 2, 3, and Bash, and now a top name for the PlayStation line of consoles, leading the project, called Crash Bandicoot Worlds. However, Cerny bailed after a falling out between him and Universal, so the publisher company decided it would be a great idea to force the devs to not only restart development completely from scratch, but also rework the project from a free-roaming platformer to a more traditional Crash game. Oh, and to add a little cherry on top, they were only given 12 months to do that. To those not in the know, let's just say that's not nearly enough time. This rework was given the current title, Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. Released in October 2001 for the PS2, Wrath of Cortex launched as an exclusive, until the following year treated society with a port for the Xbox and GameCube, with Eurocom helping out with the latter. All 3 versions weren't received in the most positive manner, with some even considering it the weakest in the mainline games. But, and this is also tradition on the series, I remember enjoying it as a kid, so I thought I'd go through the game now and see if it holds up. Went well the first time, maybe third time will be the charm as well. And much like I did Sonic Heroes before, I'm playing the PS2 version on an emulator, but don't worry, I do own a physical copy. So yeah, let's get into it. The game opens up on one of Cortex's space stations, and we see Uka Uka chastising Cortex and his henchmen from Crash 3 because they can't dominate the world as planned.
Imbeciles! Fools! Nincompoops!
Seriously? That's the best you could come up with? Alright, I'm not gonna lie, this opening cutscene gets dull pretty quickly. The whole time with the villains, it's just them planning their next move on killing Crash, and decide that a secret weapon of Cortex's will suffice. Why Cortex was keeping it a secret is beyond me, but that's besides the point. Uka Uka then suggests using a group of evil masks known as the Elementals to power this weapon, who we later learn is named Crunch Bandicoot. Another mutant Bandicoot, a concept that I actually really like because Crash was meant to be a mutant warrior for Cortex originally, so it's like you're going against the warrior that you were supposed to be. We then move to the heroes, who are just chilling on the beach when all of a sudden, natural disasters crash, the party. And Aku Aku figures out this is Uka Uka's doing. The 2 masks meet, the elementals arrive, Aku Aku informs Crash and Coco, they go to a workshop. You see what I mean by this part being boring? Alright, not off to a great start, but maybe the gameplay will be better. Well, before we get into that, I should say that this game is so radically different compared to previous games that I'll be taking a look at each different gameplay type. If you don't get it now, you'll understand as I go. Oh goody, the loading times. Yeah, this is pretty standard to complain about, but they're way too long and not really all that interesting to look at. Wait, what? That wasn't that long at all. Maybe it's because I'm playing on an emulator, but that was incredibly quick. Oh well, whatever, moving on. So first off, we have the standard Crash platforming affair. And if you've played Crash 3, there really isn't much different here. You have all the same powers and abilities from that game, and they all are used exactly the same. As far as Crash himself goes, he actually feels really good to control. The jumping is a little floaty, but you still get the right amount of height and distance you need. I've heard complaints about input delay and whatnot, but personally, I never experienced that stuff. But that could just be because I'm playing on the apparent best version of the game. As for the levels, they are pretty good overall, with none really sticking out as bad, and some even serious highlights in my eyes. But I'll go over all of that later. The only major issue I have, specifically with levels like Compactor Reactor and Jungle Rumble, is that the levels are a little wider, and thus the enemy placement, for the most part, is a lot less threatening. Couldn't they just add a few more? Just because I could, I spent most of the platforming part of Compactor Reactor sparing as many enemies as I could, and I got through it relatively fine. Oh, I lied, there's another major issue. The monkey bars are completely ruined. For reference, this is how they work in the original trilogy. And here it is in Wrath of Cortex. I hate it. I hate it so much. Now, much like in Crash 3, you gain new powers when you beat the bosses, including the return of the Devil Jump, Death Tornado, and Weapon Bazooka. And the only new ability added, Sneak Shoes, which are only used to tiptoe across specifically placed lines of nitro crates. How anyone thought this was a good idea is beyond me. Now, as for those highlights I mentioned, there's Wizards and Lizards, with somewhat challenging platforming, at least for the start of the game, coupled with a chase sequence against a freaking dragon, the Gauntlet, where the name speaks for itself, and Cortex Vortex, the last main level in the game, which tests all your abilities, including the Sneak Shoes. Next up, there's the vehicles, and these are why the game is so divisive. There's a buttload of them, and a lot of them, well, let's just say they could have used some work. First off, there are the flight levels, either in a biplane, and insect-looking thing, and a spaceship. The biplane, used in Tornado Alley and Boss 4, feels pretty decent to control with the speed, turning, and shooting. The shooting could use a faster rate of fire, but I guess I'll live. The insect, used in That Sinking Feeling, is easily the worst out of the three. It doesn't feel too awful to move around in, but the problem is that while the biplane used machine guns, this has homing missiles that take forever to lock on. Doesn't help that your targets here can take 3 shots each, and the enemies have anti-stormtrooper aim now. And lastly, we have the spaceship, easily the best one of the 3, used in Crash droids. It's the fastest and has the fastest rate of fire, and the turning doesn't feel overly sensitive. I gotta say, this level is actually pretty good. Why did I die? Next up is the Atmosphere, a giant ball that you roll around in a la Super Monkey Ball. This is used 5 times throughout the game. It's used in the levels Bamboozled, Eskimo Roll, Medieval Madness, the bonus level Solar Blower, and the first boss. And every single one of these levels are fantastic. These levels are structured like physics-based obstacle courses, and the ball controls are perfect. The physics are tight enough that you can escape from death-defying moments, but not too tight that it makes obstacles anything more than a nuisance. And I actually quite like the speed you roll at. It's great. Easily the best vehicle in the game. Next up is a minecart, unfortunately only used twice. The beginning of Compactor Reactor, and the bonus level Ghost Town. The only input you have is leaning left and right, but the leaning feels so perfect to use, making impossible looking moments like this, well, possible. The issue is just how underutilized it is. The way it's used in Compactor Reactor is perfect, but in Ghost Town, you're racing against Crunch. You want to know the issue with this? Well, just watch this. Yeah. Next up is a Jeep, which is used in a chase sequence in the second half of Jungle Rumble, and a hog ride styled racing level, Smokey and the Bandicoot. The Jeep controls pretty much identically to the motorcycle from Crash 3, except it's very bouncy, making it a little unpredictable and honestly kind of fun in my opinion. I do wish the Jeep was able to reverse though. That way the box breaking in Smokey and the Bandicoot would be a lot less frustrating. I know the motorcycle had the same issue, but I didn't like it there either, so yeah. Next up are the underwater levels, and woo boy, these are the worst levels in the game. No Crash game, to my knowledge, was able to make underwater levels good, not even Crash 3, but these are especially bad. Seashell Shenanigans, the beginning portion of H2O No, and Coral Canyon all take the title of worst levels in the game. It's not that the controls are necessarily awful, but the areas are way too big and they are filled to the brim with enemies, all of which move insanely faster than you, and some even hide behind the scenery. Why is that a design in a video game? Who thought this was a good idea? Oh, and if you thought it was bad already, it all gets even worse when you get in a submarine. So remember that thing in Crash 3, the thing that if you get hit, all that happens is you lose it? Yeah, that's been changed here, and not for the better. First off, this thing moves way slower than you do on your own. Secondly, you have a much bigger hitbox, and combine that with the slower speed makes it borderline impossible to avoid the enemies. Easily my least favorite out of them is Coral Canyon, which not only has every single issue the other water levels have, but also has 2 crates that'll turn into metal crates if not destroyed quick enough. The second of which is really close to Nitro, so I assumed I'd get it at the end. But nope. I played this level twice and missed a single crate on both runs. It sucks. This level sucks. Next up isn't a vehicle, but it is a change of pace. Wrath of Cortex marks the very first time you get to play as Coco in a traditional platforming sense, rather than being locked to riding her or flying a plane. And there's a reason it took until Insane Trilogy for that to happen again. That reason being, she controls worse than Crash in every single way. As someone once put it, she feels like you're playing a Crash 3 level using Crash 1's physics. Her jumps are a lot heavier, the slide move, and thus the slide jump, has been replaced by whatever this is supposed to be, and she only gets 2 out of the 6 upgrades, that being the Super Ground Pound and the Crash Dash. But being honest, I got the hang of Coco's controls just fine. The level Banzai Bonsai is designed with her controls in mind. Tsunami and Avalanche are chases for half of the levels. Nighttime is basically the Gauntlet, but worse. All that's decent stuff. But that said, the Gem Route and Tsunami can die in a fire ironically. The amount of times I've died here because of Coco's heavy jumping is ridiculous and I hate it. Also, the bonus level, Force of Nature, which uses the snowboard from Avalanche in a, well, whatever this is, and is the last level in the game, is the worst way to end things off, taking everything I didn't like about the Jeep and motorcycle and making them so much worse. Next up is a copter pack, used in the level Fahrenheit Frenzy and the bonus level Ice Station Bandicoot. To put it simply, this thing is basically the jetpack from Crash 2, except slower and thus easier to control. So basically, I think this thing is better than the jetpack. It takes a bit of getting used to the controls, but once I got the hang of it, I actually really liked moving around in this thing. Next up is a Mech Suit, looking very similar to the Power Loader suit from Alien, used not only on the front of the box, but also the levels Droid Void and Crate Balls of Fire. And it's used for standard platforming. What? Not only that, but this thing is seriously limited. Jumping while moving is fine, but jumping while standing still is incredibly stiff. And your only means of attacking is a Wumpa Gun, which acts exactly like the Wumpa Bazooka you get later in the game. And all of this wouldn't be that big of an issue if it weren't for the fact that, like the submarine from earlier, is a thing that you're stuck in until the end of the level. You get hit in this thing without Aku Aku, you're dead. Which is even more unfortunate because I'm almost positive I could get through these levels without the armor in the first place. The levels will be massive and therefore less interesting, but at least I wouldn't be limited so much and still have power-ups I've gotten at that point, like the double jump or the death tornado. The point I'm getting at is, while the platforming in some of the vehicles are pretty good, the rest of the vehicles are just really bad. And I haven't even gotten to the bosses yet. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. Unlike previous games, where the bosses are against different and memorable characters, all the bosses in this game are against Crunch, powered by each different elemental. Most people complain that fighting the same target is really boring and lazy, but I am not most people. I like to think of these fights as against each different elemental, not just Crunch, especially since you don't fight Crunch himself until the end. But that doesn't save these fights from being meh to awful. Boss 1 is against the Earth Elemental Rocco, who gives Crunch the ability to roll into a Ball. What? Oh, hey, it's the atmosphere. This fight has to be great, right? No, it sucks. The reason the atmosphere is so good is because the levels they take place in are obstacle courses, and it's really fun to roll around with the ball's physics. In this fight, you're in a giant bowl and you need to hit these pebbles. Hit them all, they rain down like meteors on Crunch. Repeat 2 more times and the fight's over. That's it. Worst fight in the game. And the second fight against the water elemental Wawa is not much better. It's a platforming boss, that's kinda neat, but all you do is jump on 3 platforms, dodging energy claps, shockwaves, and energy waves along the way, spin Crunch, and repeat 3 more times and you win. I've seen many people take ages to beat this fight, but for me, it was kinda pathetic. I died only 1 time to this guy and then had no trouble going forward. Boss 3 is against the fire elemental, Pyro. First off, Crunch's design here actually scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. And looking back now, yeah, I can kind of see why. The actual fight is just you running away from Crunch while he throws flaming rocks at you, until you get into a Mech Suit, which will let you chase him down and spray him with a water gun. The concept is pretty simple, but I don't mind that much. Boss 4 is against the air elemental, Lolo. And as you can see, this is a really boring version of the engine fight from Crash 3. I really don't know what more to say. It's too long, too slow, and all in all, just really boring. Definitely better than the first and second fights, but not great. And now we have the final boss, and this is easily the best fight in the game. You have to dodge attacks from every single elemental, shoot Crunch with the bazooka, which yes, the bazooka finally being required is amazing, and then spin Cortex. Do this 4 times and you win. I actually like how the attacks feel random, and despite the fight being pretty easy, it's still pretty fun. So the gameplay and bosses are very hit or miss, but how is the game presentation wise? Well, graphically, the game actually looks pretty decent for a PS2 game. The character models are a little rough, but given the game's rushed development and the fact that this is Traveler's Tales' first game on the new hardware, I'll let it slide. And the levels themselves actually look really good in my opinion. Not a single area is boring to look at, even darker areas like the medieval castle or laboratories. Technicality-wise, I experienced a few frame rate drops around areas like here, but that's because I'm playing on an emulator. On a physical copy, if there was a frame drop, I didn't notice them. I've heard some people experiencing glitches, but I never encountered any, so I don't know what I can say in that regard. Audio-wise, the voice acting is pretty good for the time. Almost all the voice actors from the original trilogy returned to reprise their roles, which is fine by me because more Clancy Brown as Uka Uka is a good thing. However, this does introduce 2 voice actors for returning characters. Debbie Derryberry as Coco, who would remain as the character leading up to the present day.
G'day.
That doesn't count. And Corey Burton as Engine, who wouldn't return as the character until Insane Trilogy. Both of them do a decent to great job as the characters, so I'm not complaining. However, 5 characters were introduced in this game, and thus 5 more voice actors. We got actors like Kevin Michael Richardson, Thomas F. Wilson, the late Arlie Ermey, Jess Harnell, who would end up voicing Crash himself later, and Mark Hamill. Wait, what? Mark Hamill? What? That's amazing!
Well, looks like the Bandicoot's been busy collecting crystals. I warned you, Bandicoot.
Finally, I get to wrap my fingers around your puny orange neck.
Don't talk back to me! I'll fix that attitude problem of yours!
The Crash Bandicoot, eh? Oh, I've heard so much about you, and this is the hero I have to blow away? Huh! Seems like a bunch of hot air to me.
Is it getting hot in here? Is it safe to be wearing that fur? It looks flammable!
But do you want to know the best part of this game? The soundtrack. This soundtrack is phenomenal. Composed by Andy Blythe and Martin Justra, please tell me if I'm pronouncing that name right, a duo who made tracks for Traveler's Tales' previous projects, the soundtrack in this game is easily my favorite collection in the series. Don't believe me? Well, here's a sample for you. yeah, that's pretty much it. As for the game itself, well, that's the thing. If you've read reviews or hung around the Crash community, you'll know that this game is the epitome of mixed bags in the series. Loads of people love this game, and loads of people absolutely hate it. Me personally, I'm kind of in the middle. I've heard people say that this is the worst game in the series, and I have to say I definitely don't agree with that. But I also don't think this game is amazing, and I'm sad about that. Being my first Crash game, and me now being a massive fan of the series, I was hoping I would have loved this game as I remembered. But with some of the level design they went for in this game, it's definitely not. But being perfectly honest, I still had fun playing through. Call it nostalgic immunity, but I still really enjoyed my time with this game. It's definitely not perfect, and not really all that great, but I still had fun. I just hope I can say that about the next review. Oh boy, I don't look forward to that. For now, that's all I have to say, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you all in the next video. Bye everybody.